Slobodan Milošević was born on August 20th, 1941, in the town of Požarevac in Serbia, which was then part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. His childhood was marked by a mixture of political unrest and personal turmoil. The land he was born into was already shaped by war, division, and ethnic tensions. The Second World War had left deep scars across the Balkans. Occupation, violence, and the rise of competing nationalist movements created an atmosphere where questions of identity and power would always be central. Into this troubled world came a boy who would one day grow to dominate the politics of Yugoslavia and ultimately bring it to collapse. Milošević grew up in a family that was shadowed by tragedy. His father was a theologian who later took his own life, and his mother, a teacher, also ended her life in despair years later. These early experiences of loss left a deep impression on him. As a young man he was seen as quiet, disciplined, and highly intelligent. He excelled in school, and those who knew him described him as ambitious, serious, and determined. By the time he entered university, he had already begun to develop the traits of a man who believed in destiny and who would not allow others to stand in his way. At the University of Belgrade, Milošević studied law. It was here that he became deeply involved in the world of communist politics. Yugoslavia at the time was under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, the legendary figure who had unified the country after World War II. Tito ruled with a firm hand, balancing the competing national groups of the federation through a mix of repression, reform, and personal authority. For many young Serbs like Milošević, politics was not simply about governance. It was about survival, identity, and the eternal struggle for recognition. Milošević rose through the ranks of the League of Communists, the ruling party of Yugoslavia. He was known for his efficiency, loyalty, and ability to maneuver within the complex structures of power. He married Mirjana Marković, a woman as ambitious as he was. She would remain his closest advisor and ally for the rest of his life. Together, they formed a partnership that was built on ideology and a shared vision of control. By the 1980s, Yugoslavia was beginning to fracture. Tito had died in 1980, and with his passing, the delicate balance he had maintained started to crumble. Nationalist sentiments grew stronger among the various republics: Croats, Slovenes, Bosniaks, Albanians, and Serbs all began to push for greater autonomy or independence. Economic decline and rising unemployment made the political climate even more volatile. It was in this setting that Milošević stepped into the spotlight. In 1987, Milošević traveled to Kosovo, a province within Serbia but one dominated by ethnic Albanians. Tensions were high between the Serbian minority and the Albanian majority. When Serbs in Kosovo complained of being mistreated, Milošević spoke with words that electrified the crowd. He declared that no one would dare to beat the Serbs again. This statement transformed him from an ordinary communist bureaucrat into the voice of Serbian nationalism. Overnight, he became a hero to many Serbs who felt marginalized and humiliated. From that moment forward, Milošević understood the power of nationalism. He positioned himself as the defender of the Serbian people, not only in Serbia but across all of Yugoslavia. He replaced old party officials with loyal followers, reshaped institutions to fit his control, and built an image of himself as the strongman who would protect the nation. He had mastered the art of political theater, using television, rallies, and propaganda to ignite emotions and gain loyalty. As the 1990s began, Yugoslavia was collapsing. Slovenia and Croatia declared independence in 1991, triggering wars marked by bloodshed and ethnic cleansing. Milošević, now the leader of Serbia, played a central role in these conflicts. His government supported Serb militias and paramilitary groups in Croatia and later in Bosnia. Though he often presented himself as a man seeking peace, behind the scenes he provided weapons, money, and political backing to forces that carried out campaigns of violence. The Bosnian War from 1992 to 1995 became one of the darkest chapters in European history since the Second World War. Sarajevo was besieged, civilians were massacred, and entire communities were destroyed. The most infamous event was the massacre at Srebrenica in 1995, where thousands of Bosnian Muslim men and boys were killed. While Milošević denied direct involvement, evidence showed that he had supported the Bosnian Serb leadership and their war efforts. His ambition to create a greater Serbia had fueled much of the conflict. Milošević was a master of double language. On one hand, he presented himself to the West as a negotiator willing to make compromises for peace. On the other hand, he nurtured nationalist fury at home, ensuring his power by convincing Serbs that they were victims surrounded by enemies. He was skilled at manipulating both his own people and foreign diplomats. For years, this balancing act allowed him to survive while wars raged across the region. By the mid-1990s, the wars in Croatia and Bosnia ended through international intervention. The Dayton Agreement of 1995, which ended the Bosnian War, was signed with Milošević at the table. Ironically, he presented himself as a peacemaker, even though his policies had helped to start the conflict. For a moment, he regained legitimacy in the eyes of some world leaders. But the shadow of war crimes and atrocities followed him wherever he went. In 1998, another conflict erupted, this time in Kosovo. Ethnic Albanians demanded independence, and the Serbian forces under Milošević responded with brutal crackdowns. Villages were burned, families displaced, and thousands were killed. The violence in Kosovo brought the North Atlantic Treaty Organization into direct confrontation with Milošević. In 1999, NATO launched a bombing campaign against Serbia, lasting 78 days. Belgrade was struck, military targets were destroyed, and the Serbian economy was shattered. The world watched as Milošević stood defiant, claiming Serbia was the victim of Western aggression. The NATO bombing weakened his power. For many Serbs, the suffering it brought was unbearable. The economy was collapsing, international isolation was suffocating, and discontent grew louder. In the year 2000, elections were held, and Milošević attempted to manipulate the results. But this time, the people refused to be silenced. Massive protests broke out across Serbia in what became known as the bulldozer revolution. Crowds stormed government buildings, demanding his resignation. Under immense pressure, Milošević stepped down. His fall from power was dramatic. A man who once controlled armies and negotiated with presidents was now abandoned by his allies. In 2001, he was arrested by the Serbian government and handed over to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. He became the first sitting or former head of state to be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The charges included genocide, deportation, and persecution. The trial of Slobodan Milošević was long and complex. He refused to recognize the authority of the tribunal, representing himself and using the courtroom as a stage for his speeches. He insisted he was defending Serbia, portraying himself as a victim of Western conspiracy. The proceedings dragged on for years, with endless documents, testimonies, and arguments. Many of his supporters in Serbia still saw him as a patriot, while others believed he had brought ruin to the nation. Before the trial could reach its conclusion, Milošević died on March 11, 2006, in his prison cell in The Hague. His death was sudden, the result of a heart condition. He never faced a final judgment from the court. For some, his death was an escape from justice. For others, it was the tragic end of a leader who believed he was chosen to defend his people. The legacy of Slobodan Milošević remains bitter and contested. To many, he was a war criminal who destroyed Yugoslavia, unleashed hatred, and left behind mass graves and broken families. To some Serbs, he was a leader who stood against the West and defended national pride. What cannot be denied is that his rule brought immense suffering, destruction, and shame to the Balkans. His story is one of ambition, nationalism, and tragedy. Slobodan Milošević began life as a disciplined student and ended as a fallen dictator on trial for some of the most serious crimes of the 20th century. His rise and fall reflect the dangers of power mixed with nationalism. His life reminds the world of how one leader can ignite fires that burn nations to ashes.